You know, everyone makes mistakes sometimes. And the mistake I made with this video, with the entirety of it, was when I was filming for this optic, I forgot to do the most crucial step, which was ensure that the scope is as far forward to give you maximum sort of eye clearance that you can get from the scope and still be able to look through it throughout the entire magnification range. This scope's about a quarter inch too far back, which means there's no real issues with the image itself, but we see a lot more of the scope body as a result. So that is why the scope body is as big as it looks. In real life, it seems big, but it's still a little bit less than that. I'd say about half to 3/4. Anyway, this is a first focal plane scope. And for any of you that don't know what this is, it's in the title. It is the VORTEX Viper PST Gen 1 2.5 to 10 by 32. This features the EBR-1C reticle, which is first focal plane as you can see, and is illuminated. Illumination isn't too bad. It's a little on the older side, so it's not as bright as some of the modern variants, but in low light environments, it works more than well enough. Unfortunately, anything more than, I would say, dusk, and you're gonna have a hard time really seeing it. But that's fine, because at least the reticle all the way down at 2.5x is still noticeable enough for all things. VORTEX PST Gen 1 2.5 to 10 by 32. As you can see, this reticle lines up to the target almost perfectly. Illumination at maximum, that's as good as it's going to get. Let's shut that off. And we're going to do 4 left, 5 down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That is as perfect as I've ever seen on any scope. That is phenomenal. So I'm going to reset the windage. Absolutely flawless. Let's continue down, or up rather. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, whoop, we are out of elevation gain. But that is, right there, that's exactly 8 mils. And that's a perfectly indicated 8 mils. So that's damn impressive. I'm going to reset this to 0. Indicated 0 on the scope, and as you can see, it goes perfect. Older tech, larger internals, just it being a little bit older, we only get 8 mils of added elevation, but it tracks perfectly. How could a scope this old? Yes, I bought this second hand and maybe third or fourth hand, and a couple of years ago. How could this perform better than some modern scopes? I don't know, but there you have it. If you want more added elevation, run a cant mount. 20 MOA should be more than sufficient to get you out there. Anyway, focusing in on our 30-yard power transformer, we take it up to its maximum of 10x. Illumination on full, like I said earlier, is on the duller side, which isn't the end of the world for an optic like this. But this thing has a beautiful side focus and allows us to get a very good looking image. Now, you're not really going to notice it in the bright sunlight like this, but once you crack it up to about 9 to 10x, the image does become a little bit darker. And that's just down to the scope itself. 2.5 to 10 by 32. It's a 30mm tube, which is pretty good, but it's only a 32mm front objective, and we are asking a lot of this thing. You know, 10x is pretty far out. I mean, it's only a 4x magnification range, but everything has to have its slight Achilles heel, but it's so unnoticeable that you only really notice it in certain environments. All the way at 2.5x, I go over the power lines, as you could see, to see if we have any real distortion to the lens. If there is anything there, I don't really pick it up, which is excellent. You have a good flat image at 2.5, very similar to what we saw in the Trijicon Credo. But unlike the Trijicon Credo, when we increase the magnification all the way up to its maximum of 10x, yeah, the image is a little blurry at first, but once we adjust the side focus, we get a beautiful, crisp image, which is what it should be able to produce, right? We can't expect too much, all things considered, but what we get is a absolutely perfectly usable image here at 400 yards. You could almost make out all the individual bricks on the dark side, and that's fantastic. Another thing that I don't see anything of is chromatic aberration. That parapet wall usually trips up in bright sunlight conditions like this, lesser quality scopes with high contrast areas. This, I don't see anything. And that tree line is probably about half the distance to that brick building, about 400 yards, about 200 yards or so. And our focal range is fantastic because even though we're focused on the brick building, that tree is still pretty well in focus. More than usable, in my opinion, which is, again, a testament to this thing and how good it is, all things considered. But let's up the ante a little bit, shall we? 800 yards is a long shot for anybody with any sort of optic and any sort of gun in any sort of environment. So honestly, it's a great little testament to see if it's good enough for you. I pull back the focus to the 30-yard power lines where, again, saw no chromatic aberration. And now focusing at 800 yards, that's a pretty damn good image, even though we're only limited here at 10x. And I'm not just shilling out for VORTEX, because I seem to like a lot of the VORTEX products, but that is a testament to how good this thing is. If you didn't watch my Credo 2 to 10 video, watch that, because that scope is at least twice the price of this thing when this thing was available, and it's nowhere near as good as this thing is at 10x. Anyway, I'm going to let the sun die down for quite a few hours. Now we're in late evening. It's around 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard, tail end of summer, beginning of fall, and you can see it's dark. If there's one thing this scope sort of lacks in, it's ultimate light transmission. It is a touch darker when the lights go out like this, and that's probably the worst end of it. So if you're looking for something that's going to let in a little bit more light in darker environments, it'll be worth looking elsewhere. Something with a larger front objective and a little bit more modern, maybe a little bit different lens coatings, that sort of thing. But here, all the way at 10x, we still have a fairly usable image, and it's still very sharp. The illumination on here is on full, and like I said, it isn't the brightest or the most elaborate. It's a very simple reticle, the EBR-1 reticle. I made a mistake. I said it was the 1C earlier. I was wrong. And it's good enough for most people. More than good enough for me and my uses with the firearm. All in all, this could be way worse. If you're like me and you follow the Navy's mindset of 1x per 100 yards on a man-sized target, a 10x scope should theoretically be able to get you out to 1,000 yards, which is right about where we are right now. And this is as dialed in as we can get it with 0 mils of added elevation. And we have, again, in my opinion, a very good image. Now, this is, again, only with 0 mils added elevation. I'm going to add the 8 mils of total range that we have with this particular scope, again, just because of the way it was designed. It's the way it is. But if you're looking for more, add a 20 MOA cant base, 15, 10, whatever. Anything if you feel like you need to get it out there. Figure out your ballistics. But even for me in a 308, 8 mils is more than enough to get me out to my maximum shooting capabilities of my local ranges. With 8 mils of added elevation, I think the center gets a little bit soft. I tweaked the focus a touch just to try to get it a little bit better. But overall, I still think it's a very usable image. All right, let's change the pace and the scenery a little bit, shall we? 50-yard range, second 50-yard range at my home away from home. And what do we got? Well, other than that really big body through, I completely apologize for failing. We have a pretty tight field of view looking through it. Okay, that's to be expected. It happens. But still, we have a pretty good image with little distortion. Cranking up the mags on these very abused steel plates in the middle, and we admire some of the cratering on some of them. Good amount of resolution here to be able to pick up a lot of those rather deep craters on that plate, especially to the right, and that is really cool to see. So if you're aiming at a particular target, or even on a paper target for that matter, and you're trying to read smaller numbers on there, it shouldn't be an issue. Illumination on full is just enough to be able to pick it up, but ultimately, that's only it. You can see that the reticle changes a slight tint of red, and that's it. Bullet holes on the top left are 22 LR, to the right are 30 carbine at 50 yards. So again, if you're using this to possibly spot your target at 50 yards, you can. Eyebox on this thing is a win in my book at 2.5x. It is surprisingly forgiving. You have a lot of leeway forward and back. Side to side, not as much. But if you are trying to get on the gun really quick, and your muscle memory or your cheek welt's not 100%, you'll be able to get on it really, really quick. 6x. 6x here, things change a little bit, but ultimately not that bad. Forward and back, you have a fair amount of leeway before you're too much in the shadows. Side to side is a little on the tighter side, but again, more than usable and practical. And of course, there's no surprises here at 10x. It gets very tight. However, if you think about it, this scope could have probably been pushed forward about 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch, and to know that you have that much leeway at 10x isn't half bad. Pushing our targets back to 100 yards at the paper and about 180 at the berm, we're going to inspect and see how much resolution this thing really has on those steel targets on the dirt berm, because those targets are pretty hard to see, all things considered, because they really blend well together. Illumination on full, again, nothing to write home about, but I figure I'll illustrate it just one more time. Now, we are spending a lot of time on the paper targets. You can just make out the white rings in the black here at 100 yards, and that's pretty impressive considering that those white rings are very narrow. I think they're about 1/8 of an inch, if not a little bit smaller, and that's pretty good. However, you can't really make out the numbers. No, not the ones at 12 o'clock that are written in gigantic paint pen, but the ones at 3 o'clock just outside the black. But again, this thing has to have some sort of limitations. One thing you can note very clearly is the mirage. It was a very hot day when I filmed this, but still it's nice to see that you can just make out the mirage with this thing. I didn't hunt for it as much as I probably should have, but it is still there. Now, despite the fact that we were focused clearly on the 100-yard paper, the berm was still pretty much in focus, and it requires ever slight tweaking to get the berm perfectly in focus. Now again, this is a very hard contrast environment, because there is almost no contrast between the steel plates, the dirt berm, and the bowling pins that have been shot to shit. It all just becomes a very muddled mess, but here we can at least make out all the larger targets on the berm with relative ease. And again, there's that mirage to make your shot that much more difficult. We go from the 200-yard berm to the 200-yard paper targets in a jump cut, because why the hell not? And you can easily make out all of the rings here at 200 yards. These targets are much larger than the ones at 100, and thus everything should be at least as easy to see, if not a little bit easier. Here, in my opinion, I feel it's a lot easier to pick it up versus the ones that we saw at 100. We focus our attention at some steel plates at the 200-yard line, all the way to the far right, clearly. I'm not too sure about the sizes, but you know what? You tell me. We can just make out some of the scaling there. So I think they're about 4 inches on the smaller ones and about 8 inches on the large one. More than easily enough to be able to pick up those size targets at those sorts of distances. We finish up here at 300 yards, and those targets, I'm not really too sure of the size, but again, that's 300 yards away. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. One final look at the steel plates at around 320 while they were still there before they got shot into oblivion. And yes, I have made shots on a 3-inch gong at 320 yards on my 308 Steyr Scout and made hits with this optic. So yes, it is absolutely possible, and I love this thing. There's no other way of putting it. It does everything that it sets out to do perfectly, and that's all I want out of anything in life. For this last segment, I'm going to leave the audio a little bit up so this way you can hear my shots of the 22LR at the steel plates about 2 or 3 weeks earlier at 320 yards. And we're going to talk about my final thoughts, or at least start getting involved in it. This scope is unapologetic about what it is. It is a very bare bones 2.5 to 10 by 32 that offers you decent illumination for what it is. a more than practical magnification range that works from minimum to maximum, an excellent side focus, good quality glass. You can pay attention every time I shoot. You could see coming in from 12 o'clock, you can follow my 22 LR bullet all the way to 320 yards.
I hit the wood right next to it.
It's fantastic. And I think these weren't appreciated as much back in the day, either for their limited magnification. Some people think that more is always better. And as a result, it's hard to find these even used, which is unfortunate. I did buy this used again a couple of years ago. In fact, my last segment is from footage when I first started the channel, but I just, for some reason, just never got to it. But this thing is fantastic, and it whole weighs 18 ounces. Now, some of you might have some questions like, where the hell are we? And what's going on? Well, this was filmed several years earlier. I was at this range with my Gen 2 setup and my old camera, and I never really filmed this scope because I never wanted to take it off my gun, but it just so happened that I was testing out some different optics, and I said, you know what, screw it. I want to see how this thing really performs. And it's fantastic here. But note the slightly smaller rim around the optic, which I was saying earlier, I screwed up with. It's a little bit narrower here, and it's a lot better. You might be saying, but see, the Gen 2 is available in about the same magnification range and same features, and you are right. But that thing is a pig. How much of a pig? It's 9 ounces heavier than this at about 26 ounces. I don't know how Vortex has, or another manufacturer has brought out an optic like this for sub $600 that's this competent and this lightweight. If they did, I can almost guarantee you that they would sell out almost immediately, or at least be extremely popular. I was really hoping that the Trijicon Credo 2-10 would be able to at least be this scope's equal, if not a little bit better. One would expect. You have Japanese glass. It's a much newer scope. Trigicon's known for making some pretty good quality stuff. But that thing is greatly missing a side focus. If it had one and cost a little bit more money, it would definitely be better than this optic. But alas, it is what it is. And that is why this Viper PST Gen 1 is still perched as the victor on top of my Scout until another scope can come along and dethrone it. And with that, as always, thank you very much for watching. See you again next time. And a very huge thank you to all of my Patreon providers. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to help support the channel but don't want to join my Patreon, I completely understand. But you can still help support by using my affiliate links in the description below. Thanks again for watching.